Hello again, I am Blunty. This is DC Universe Online. 3 months ago, it was announced that Daybreak Game Company, who develop and publish it, will bring this free-to-play action combat MMORPG game to the Nintendo Switch. In fact, it launches within a day or so of this video going live. I'm not sure whether it's going to be a simultaneous worldwide release. It probably should be for an MMO, but on the website it just says August 6th, which is what it is today when I record this, but of course I'm in Australia or on the other side of the date line, so it's probably meaning August 7th for me. Daybreak are also responsible for games such as EverQuest, EverQuest 2, The Matrix Online, Star Wars Galaxies, H1Z1 Just Survive, H1Z1 King of the Kill, and they acquired Dungeons & Dragons Online and Lord of the Rings Online, amongst many other games. So kind of a decent pedigree when it comes to online games. The second most interesting thing about DC Universe Online launching on the Nintendo Switch is it will be only the third MMORPG for that system. The first two being Onigiri, which has a very strong Japanese flavour, and Elemental Knights Online, a similarly anime-inspired game, but the latter is just a crappy port of a mobile game, which brings along with it all the crap that goes with mobile games, and that means I barely count it as a game. Mobile gaming is a cancer to the industry. And while there are other technically MMO games on or coming very soon to the system, such as Dauntless, Warframe, Fortnite of course, none of those are really full-fat MMORPGs. Whereas DC Universe Online has a much broader appeal, being based on DC Comics characters, everyone from the highest profile spandex spankers to the other more obscure characters only real comics fans and not just the TV and movie watchers will know. And DC Universe Online is a true full-fat RPG, including surprisingly deep character creation systems with a huge pile of possible combinations of roles and powers and abilities and looks and costumes. And of course, it is a story-driven experience. And in-game you have a vast array of abilities, combat styles, all kinds of perks, consumables, stat boosters and the like. I'm not going to do a deep dive on that stuff here, but suffice to say, while the early game combat may look, at first glance, something like a basic brawler akin to Marvel Ultimate Alliance or something like that, it is a significantly richer and more nuanced system, much more in line with the kind of systems you'll see in other action-based MMORPG systems. But like I said, being almost entirely unique on the Nintendo Switch marketplace is only the second most interesting thing here. The most interesting thing about all this is, the game is actually nearly a decade old already. And if you already knew about the game from back in the day, you may be forgiven for assuming it died off long ago right alongside other MMORPGs that never reached the heights or stamina of the likes of WoW or Final Fantasy 15 or Elder Scrolls Online. I certainly did. Can't even remember the last time I even heard about this game. So let's bounce through the history real quick. DC Universe Online was first teased in mid-2008 with some concept art, followed shortly by a teaser trailer at E3 that same year, but a gameplay beta test not seeing the light of day until 2.5 years later in December of 2010. The beta ran into the first week of January 2011, and about a week after it shut down, the game saw a full launch on the 11th of January 2011. And I was pretty damn excited about the game, being a big fan of DC Comics characters, and counting Batman and Superman in particular as significant parts of my nerddom from my late childhood through to, well, continuing on really, I never stopped. But the thought of embodying my own unique custom character inspired by the likes of Batman or Nightwing or Superman or Green Lantern or Wonder Woman or The Flash, zipping around a crime-ridden city, kicking the crap out of common criminals and supervillains, all while sharing the world with countless other real people living out their very own superhero power fantasies, it was all very enticing. So, I purchased the game. In fact, I pre-ordered the game, which launched on PC and PlayStation 3. I got it on the PlayStation because I didn't have a decent gaming PC back then. It was a full-price title, which is where the trouble started, actually. As I mentioned in the opening, it's a free-to-play game now. We'll circle back to that in a second. In a side note though, in a bizarre coincidence that borders on me wondering if I have some sort of latent precognizant mental powers, I stumbled across and tweeted out a screenshot of my original PS3 DC Universe character while trying to find a different old photo about a month before they actually announced the Switch port was coming, so that was kind of weird. Anyway, gameplay at launch was a bit rough, performance was less than entirely consistent, and the control scheme was quite unusual compared to most games I played. It took a while to get used to, but I was very much enjoying myself for the most part. Until, that is, on November the 1st, 2011, which is, if you're not very good at math, less than a year after launch. They effed over all of the full price paying players by vomiting in a whole stack of gross and skeevy microtransaction crap and making the game free to play. Suffice to say, quite a lot of the existing player base felt a bit miffed by this move. A bit hard done by, really. I protested this in the only way I could. I stopped playing. And that's the commentary, the story that I told with the Twitter post I'd made out of my old screenshot. I mean, let's be fair, I get making an MMO game free to play after a while, perhaps. It's better if they launch that way from the beginning so everyone starts off understanding exactly what the deal is. And it's kind of like some of the EA stuff that's been happening more recently, where they slam in microtransactions after selling the game and after reviews come out and all that sort of stuff. But making an MMO game in particular lowers the friction points of bringing in new players, as anybody can now try it out with no risk and no cost but their own time. And bringing in microtransactions to give a now free game a regular revenue stream so the developers can still get paid and afford to keep making new content, no problem in theory. My main issue was how quickly that pivoted with this game. I felt betrayed, I felt cheated, and I wasn't alone. As I said, there was a lot of predictable outrage among the existing player base back in the day. And as another side note, the exact same friggin' thing happened to me a couple of years later with the Star Wars MMO. Paid full price, and it very, very quickly went free to play and crammed itself full of microtransactions. But the game survived all that, holding enough of a community to justify a PlayStation 4 port in November 15, 2013, and then an Xbox One port on April 29, 2016, the PlayStation 3 version then being shut down on January 31, 2018, and now, as I opened with, coming to Nintendo Switch on August 6, 2019. And if you're wondering why this was a console exclusive for PlayStation 4 so long, well, Daybreak, the developers and publishers, they used to be called Sony Online Entertainment. Then, in February 2015, Sony sold it off, they changed the name to Daybreak, and 6 months after that we saw the Xbox port. And in the 8.5 years since that original launch, there's been a constant stream of new content with no less than 34 new pieces of episodic DLC being added, and several sets of seasonal content alongside that. With the launch of the Nintendo Switch version, any and all players will be starting from scratch, and it's launching with all 8 years worth of content right there on day one, keeping it in parity with all the other platforms this game exists on. You don't even need Nintendo Switch Online, as you do with many other multiplayer games on Switch. You can go free to play, with individual content purchases as you go and as you want them, or you can get a membership, subscription basically, granting access to everything, so long as you keep paying. Which does seem like a pretty sensible system. The more casual player can just do the free-to-play path and buy the stuff they want to play when they want to play it, and the dedicated player can just pay a subscription and not worry about that crap. And in one of the most important points, there is no character or account transfer system for players on other platforms. And the Nintendo Switch version will have its own fresh servers with no crossplay to other platforms either. Although they do say they look forward to exploring crossplay options in the future. We already know crossplay is completely possible on the Nintendo Switch. I think they're just holding it off to give everyone a fresh start on this platform, and once the player base matures a bit, they'll turn on the crossplay so they can then sort of maintain a larger player base once people start falling away from the game, because all MMOs do this. They have an initial surge, then some players fall away, and then the core players are left on the system, and that's when you should be turning on crossplay, because everyone will have leveled up their characters enough, and an MMO is always more interesting with a larger community. We'll see what happens. But this fresh start, this clean start is what makes it interesting to me again. I mean, if I wanted to go back to the game before now, I could have been playing it on PC or PlayStation or Xbox or whatnot. But with the Nintendo Switch version, much like World of Warcraft Classic versus existing World of Warcraft players, everyone is starting fresh. Everyone's starting with a new character at level 1, step 1. I'm sure, of course, some long-time existing or lapsed players will jump in, bringing with them a greater, deeper understanding of the game's nuances and skill trees, giving them a bit of an edge when it comes to developing the characters and knowing which is the best way to do things and all that kind of stuff. But it does mean I won't be stepping into a world populated by level-cap monster power players and finding myself out of step as a brand new, fresh-faced newbie player. And it's also been too long for me now to still be really pissy about having a full-price game go free-to-play microtransaction-based systems before even it had been out a year. Don't get me wrong, I'm still pretty dark about that move, but frankly, seeing as there's been a constant stream of new content, patches, new gameplay, new systems, over that intervening 8 years, it's filled me with some confidence that the developers' obvious long-term commitment to the game and player base can be trusted. As clearly, the only reason for them to be making a port for the Switch in the first place is if the existing player base on other platforms has proven to be viable and still active enough, and regularly engaged with the game enough to be buying stuff in-game, to make publishing the damn thing financially viable in the first place. Honestly, I thought the game long dead. I never hear about it anymore, or know anyone who still plays it, but the devs have ported it across 3 generations of platforms now, and have been making at least 3 new episodic chapters a year for it. So I guess it's still pretty alive, if surprisingly low-key for a DC Universe superhero MMO. And maybe the Switch version, alongside the current much higher profile of comic superhero content thanks to a decade's worth of Marvel's spectacular movies and DC's, well, their movies are a bit crap, aren't they? But their TV shows are largely well worth watching and quite popular, and have a viewership far outside the kind of players the game would have originally attracted 9 years ago, before this latest superhero media boom. And all that's alongside the higher visibility that the Nintendo Switch platform, a platform much less saturated, especially for MMORPGs, than the other ones are, can afford it. So maybe all of this is kind of a recipe for a significant revival, a resurgence for this game's profile. Or maybe it'll be like other mid-tier MMOs and sort of sink back into relative obscurity once it's sort of glued onto a small but loyal player base. Either way, I will be giving it another go on Nintendo Switch. I am going in with relatively low expectations, because I've been poking around a bit, and even amongst the most dedicated and still active players, I see a repeated notion that there's still some issues with the game. In particular, I see cited the lack of much useful communication from the devs when it comes to new content and what players should be expecting and such like that. And of course, the ongoing complaints about its gross microtransactions. But the interest is very much there for me, but my hype is well under control. I have been burned before on this game. Now, for the gameplay I've been showing in this video, which is the PC version, by the way, in case you were curious, and despite playing on the PC, I have been playing with a controller because I wanted to see how this game would feel on a controller, because obviously a controller is the only option for the Nintendo Switch. A mouse and keyboard are the more natural MMORPG interface by and large, but this game was developed for the Sony PlayStation 3, so you'd have to think they'd made the controller scheme work. And it does actually work better than I'd expected, and better than I remember it playing, actually. And to preface that, you are watching some admittedly clumsy gameplay. I started a character from scratch and rushed through the tutorial stuff to see how the game feels and plays. I probably should have paid more attention to my stats and abilities in tutorials and got a proper rotation and stuff going, but for the purposes of getting a quick grope refresher at a game I've not played in 7 years, yeah, it was fine. It uses a kind of shift key system, which makes the controller face buttons do more than a single job, and it actually controls pretty intuitively once you get a little feel for it. The UI can get a bit crowded, like most MMORPGs can do, but for the most part, it's easy enough to move through and find what you need to find and stuff like that. Movement feels decent, though the game does still feel its age, both from a design point of view and from an engine point of view, and not just how it looks either. Combat feels decent, much more action-based, for example, compared to my recent experiences with World of Warcraft Classic beta and stress tests. It feels a lot more like a classic brawler in the basics of combat, which is a good thing for a superhero game, of course. But of course, as I mentioned before, as you play, you'll unlock more and more abilities and items and boosters and buffs and debuffs and stuff for a much more nuanced system than your average brawler affords. I have no idea if this game will manage to be sticky enough to hold me. But it's free, so, no cost to me but my own time. And it is time I'm happy to spend, just in case it winds up being really fun. Because I do want it to be fun enough to stick with. As excited and hyped as I am about WoW Classic, I've made no secret that I'm a bigger fan of comics and sci-fi than I am of classic fantasy settings. And for the couple of hours I plugged into the PC version here to see the state of things and to get some gameplay for this video, I can certainly see myself falling into a gentle grind in this game. It's promising. So, are you going to join me in exploring these, and I now quote from the marketing, immersive, story-driven adventures in Gotham City, Metropolis, Titan's Island, Themyscira, Atlantis, and many other famous DC locations? And are you going to be a villain or a hero? Because both are options in this game, by the way. Do you want to be a punching power person, Superman-inspired, or a magic user, or a ring slinger, or a speedster, or an elemental? Me? I'm going to go what I seem to remember the game once calling a gadgeteer class. But actually, I didn't see that term used in the game while testing it out this time. Suffice to say, though, I'm Batman. Well, to be honest, maybe I'm more Nightwing than Batman, really. I'm not quite dark enough to go full bat, am I? Thanks for watching. I am Blunty, and I will catch you next time. And I hope to see you in the seedy alleyways of Gotham City.